This is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
You don't hear too much about serverless computing. At least I haven't. We know that it's been around, but I think, quite frankly, containers have dominated the conversation over the last 3 years. So in today's episode, I have the privilege of interviewing Mark Gould. He is a cloud security engineer at Manhattan Associates. And I think this episode is useful because if you're not overly familiar with serverless technology, Mark's going to talk about its use, and I know that he's a big fan of the Google Cloud platform. So enjoy the episode, and I think, I'd love to hear from you, the audience. What do you want to hear more of? Do you want to hear more from day-to-day practitioners? Are you looking to hear more of thought leadership? Go ahead and send us an email at cloudsec, that's S-E-C, cloudsec today at gmail.com. Again, cloud, S-E-C, today at gmail.com. I want to hear from you. What do you want to learn about in the coming year? Mark, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Why don't we start out by you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Manhattan Associates?
Sure thing, Matt. Thanks for having me. My name's Mark Gould, Manhattan Associates. I'm a cloud security engineer, and I've worked around in this industry for 3 years solely based on cloud security and the cloud security we do at Manhattan using products like AWS and Google Cloud Platform. Now, when I first joined Manhattan Associates, I kind of joined at a time when we were heavily moving into the cloud sector, and I joined as a system administrator, and I noticed around me this huge push to move into this public cloud space. And I always like to use the term, luck is where hard work meets opportunity. So kind of seeing that opportunity in place, I put in the hard work to kind of learn about more Google, more about AWS, all the public clouds, and I ended up getting certified as a Google Cloud Architect.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, and then after I got certified as Google Cloud Architect, I was approached by our security team that kind of had a gap in Google knowledge because I think out of all the clouds, a lot of people have AWS knowledge, but Google knowledge seems to be few and far between. I think in the Atlanta area alone, there's only around 160 publicly available professional cloud architects. And so I took up the position there, and now what I do is I manage our risks that we have in the cloud, and I design and implement projects to kind of mitigate those risks.
So now I think a little bit of background on Manhattan Associates, right? So I did look up some of some metrics, and they were pretty impressive. It says you guys connect 2 billion people with over 20 billion consumer choices. You move 150,000 pairs of shoes every hour. You move 300,000 tons of food every day. And we have over 100 billion in retail pharmaceuticals to help people stay healthy. So what does all that mean? Are you guys a logistics company? I mean, I would imagine that you guys, with those numbers like that, there is just some massive data flows happening. Give us a little more context on Manhattan Associates, and then maybe how does cloud technology fit into that picture supporting all that?
Yeah, so we're a supply chain software company, and we build a lot of suites of software that help people optimize and make their supply chain more efficient when it comes to omni-channel operations or warehouse management. One of the stats I always like to give out, it's not so much a stat, but it's something at least I'm personally proud of with this company, is that we've been rated for 9 years straight one of the top workplaces in Atlanta. I think we've hit the top 10 for 9 years straight. And so we're always looking for new talent. And I think in an industry where it's very tough to retain talent, that's something that I think is huge. But when it comes to using supply chain software and the cloud-based products that go along with that, that gives us the scalability, the availability, and these new revenue channels that allow us to go to more customers in more regions than we could before. A lot of things we do in the cloud, and especially with the new Log4j vulnerability that just came out, being in the cloud allowed us to act faster and more agile to service our customers based on that vulnerability, which, I feel like, especially looking at Twitter recently, feel like that was an issue a lot of companies had that we were able to solve fairly quickly because of how cloud-based and agile we were.
I love that. And so with a company like Manhattan Associates, I know you mentioned, AWS, Google Cloud, how does cloud really kind of fit into that whole picture? Give us kind of maybe the 10,000-foot view, and talk about how it's kind of intertwined into kind of all the activities that you guys are doing, giving customers that omni-channel experience.
Well, for our active Omni products, if we sign with a customer, they're able to get real-time updates and real-time data for either their inventory, their warehouse management, where the product is. We can even use that information sometimes to make inventory predictions with our product.
Okay. So that makes sense. I have a little bit of an e-commerce background from my eBay days.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. I remember one of the biggest challenges we had back in the day was when you've got, multiple different warehouses, right? There's especially during, Christmas season with high velocity inventories. It's always a challenge, right? When you talk about,
there's always a busy season for
right,
us, so.
Right. So, and I noticed you guys are not just focused on, let's say, just consumer items, right? There's also, retail pharmaceutical pieces. I saw here that you guys got over 8 miles across 4 oceans and 6 continents, expanding commerce globally across the globe. So, I guess a question I have for you is, and I think this is a passion area for you, is that one of the things that, as organizations move to the cloud, that they are constantly, I'd say almost pelted with, is the whole concept of automation. But from my experience, you don't actually get it automatically when you move to the cloud, right? So think about, right? You open up a new Google Cloud account, right? You don't just get automation, right? Tell me a little bit about that. If you were, advising a company, they've just opened up maybe a new Google account, where should they start? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think what's great about, the public cloud is so much is managed for you, but managed and automated are two different things. I think a lot of companies, when they do move to the cloud, they try to do a lift and shift model where they just copy and paste what they have on-prem and throw it up into the cloud. And I think the first thing they need to do is, plan out, look at what products the cloud does have to offer and where you can fit maybe some cloud native products or some automation into that. A great example would be Bash and Host. I know a lot of companies, they use Bash and Host, and they'll copy and paste that into their cloud platform when, I know Google and AWS, they both have managed services for that. They have WAFs. I think the industry always likes to say that cloud is just someone else's computer, but I think people, they hear that and they don't think of how many different abilities and projects and products that they have in the cloud, that if you can redesign the architecture of your product and make it not just a copy and paste clone into the cloud, but make it a cloud product, how much money they can save and how much more secure it can be. And when it comes to automation, I think a lot of people who do move lift and shift into the cloud, they don't really have that coding knowledge to know, hey, we have things like Lambda, we have things like Cloud Functions. I'm not as familiar with Azure or OCI, but I know they have to have at least some kind of serverless function too. And so I think it's important to plan out exactly how you move into the cloud and how you can fit these cloud products into your own product.
Now I'm curious, and feel free to share as much as you can or not. Manhattan Associates, as you guys have moved into different cloud platforms, how much was lift and shift versus hey, we're going to refactor and go cloud native? I know we're going to talk about serverless computing. I know that's a passion area for you. But I'm just curious, I assume, do you guys have a mix of lift and shift, or what does that look like at Manhattan Associates?
We do try to utilize a lot of cloud products we have. I wasn't here when we first deployed, so I don't really have much of an answer for that, but we do use and utilize a lot of the cloud products that are provided from Google, AWS, and other vendors.
Okay. All right. So now, have you had, I know you've been at Manhattan Associates now for about 3 years. From what you can share, has there been a lot of modernization efforts, right? So I know a lot of what I see from talking with, different organizations across the world, a lot of what their first wave into the cloud, right, was, as you said, right, it was lift and shift. Let's just mirror our data center. And they found out that, well, when they do that, cloud is actually really expensive, right? It's more expensive than my data center. So I know a lot of organizations have had projects to kind of go back and look at it, say, okay, how do we take advantage of serverless? How do we take advantage of containers? What does that look like at Manhattan?
Yeah, I think one of the great parts about working here is that you won't find a single person who isn't excited or wants to get a part of the newest and greatest technologies. So when it comes to stuff like machine learning or the new products that Google has, I feel like a lot of people here, from the top down are always willing to jump onto it. And we definitely, I feel like, have a modernized product in the cloud that is great for our customers, and it's great for even our employees to work with. It's always great to come into work and you're not worried about, oh, I have to work with this legacy system. It's always, what's the newest toy out there and how can we incorporate it into our product? And I think that's really what makes us a great place to work for and a great culture.
So I know you personally are a big fan of serverless computing. I think for many organizations, there's still something that they're either experimenting with or maybe kind of thinking about as they look into 2022. Maybe just, educate us a little bit. Like, what workloads have you found are most ideal for serverless, and maybe then put a security twist on that for us? What tends to be the biggest security risks that you've seen with them?
Yeah, so I think serverless, because it's so lightweight, it's so much code, it's kind of limitless to what you can and can't do with it. I find it's great for stuff like data processing or incorporate it into a data flow kind of workflow. It's also great if you want to try to do machine learning. And personally, I've used it myself to do web apps because it's so easy to trigger. Let's say you have a sort of file that you upload into a bucket and you want to ensure its integrity or you want to ensure the security of it. You can have it the second it gets into the bucket to trigger a serverless cloud function that checks either the hashes or the integrity of the file. I think Netflix is always a poster child when it comes to the serverless architecture. My wife and I will be on the couch looking at stuff on Netflix, and she might not notice it, but every time I go on Netflix, I'm always just immensely impressed with how fast everything on Netflix is, from getting the thumbnails of what the movies are to how fast you can fast forward them and get them, and all that's because of the serverless architecture that they implement. They have a bunch of Lambda functions that encode all the videos that get uploaded by their publishers into S3. They use that, like I said, to do automated backups, and they use it to ensure the integrity of their files. Other great serverless processes that you can do is if you just need to improve maybe a great example would be, let's say you need to improve an employee onboarding process. You come up with a KPI that's taking a long time to kind of get this data transfer from our HR system to maybe Azure or whatever other systems you use. You could put in either a public cloud-based serverless in there to say, hey, when this data comes in, parse it, format it, and try to send it out to these different systems with their API. So it definitely takes a lot of the manual workload off things. And at Manhattan, that's what we really try to use it for, is to automate and get rid of that manual workflow that would otherwise take too much time.
Now, have you found that obviously you would have to refactor things, right, in order to do it in a serverless way? Has that been, I guess from an engineering perspective, has that been a pretty big lift? Is that something that's taken months to do? I'm just curious, because I know, again, a lot of people are looking at serverless, trying to see how does this fit. They can see the cost advantages. What's that look like at Manhattan?
Yeah, I would say the refactoring is not so much of the issue. I would say starting serverless is what's easy. But before anyone gets into serverless, I would say the hardest part is ensuring it can be maintained. Because at least when I first started serverless, I was under the impression that, you throw in your code to a Lambda function or you throw in an app to Cloud Run and you just leave it and it maintains itself. And that can't be further from the truth. I learned pretty quickly that, there is such a thing as over automation. And it's always a joke in especially this industry that we'll spend 4 hours automating a task that takes 4 seconds. So I think the issue is, you definitely have to pick what kind of processes you want to automate and make sure that you're willing to put in the work to maintain them. But, once you have that down, it becomes something that really does make your life a lot easier.
Prisma Cloud secures infrastructure, applications, data, and entitlements across the world's largest clouds, all from a single unified solution. With a combination of cloud service provider APIs and a unified agent framework, users gain unmatched visibility and protection. Prisma Cloud also integrates with any continuous integration and continuous delivery workflow to secure cloud infrastructure and applications early in development. You can scan infrastructure as code templates, container images, serverless functions, and more while gaining powerful, full-stack runtime protection. This is unified security for DevOps and security teams. To find out more, go to prismacloud.io. Mark, talk with us maybe a little bit around just some of the security risks that you've seen with using serverless functions. I would assume that there are benefits, right? Because you don't have to worry about maybe some of the other things that you would if you were running, say, something even in a container. But are there risks that are unique to serverless functions?
Yeah, I would say one of the great things about serverless functions and serverless in general is that it's just so managed for you. And the issue with that is that you don't feel like there actually is a security risk when there could be kind of underlying security risks that you don't understand. So, first and foremost, when it comes to serverless, is that it's very lightweight. It's mostly just the code you put in. So security should start with building secure code right off the bat. You don't want to have plain text secrets in your
Mm.
code. You don't want to be exposing environmental variables, and even if you build a web app, you can build a great serverless web app, but if you're transferring data unencrypted to other web apps, it being serverless doesn't matter. It's really talks a lot about this whole shift left movement where security is starting to become more in the code rather than from outside of it. So definitely, keep making sure that the code is secure, but also there's a lot of tools you can use like Prisma that will be able to secure the cloud functions for you that I'm excited to try out.
So how do you so you can scan the code? Is there anything that you guys have found to be useful at Manhattan Associates, right? So if you guys are taking advantage of these functions, I like how you said right there, they could be fairly straightforward to build, but as you start to build them out, right, you still have to maintain them. Have you
Yeah.
found certain things that help to automate, either the maintenance of these, right? Because I think at the end of the day, and you tell me if I've got this right. So when you're looking at a serverless function, when it executes, right, there's the permissions that it runs under, right? So there's the identity side of it. What permissions is it given to run? And then there are also the libraries, right, behind it where there could be
Yeah.
vulnerabilities. Outside of like identity and just kind of vulnerability management of the packages, are those the two primary areas around security that you would be concerned with, or are there other areas that folks should be looking at as well as they're exploring serverless?
Well, I was saying the security of the packages is definitely a huge one. Even outside of serverless, that's an issue that everyone's going to have. But I think another great thing that the cloud does is they also automate the management of secrets, and they can automate the management of rotating those secrets. Because I feel like a lot of times developers, the idea to secure a secret in there, they won't expect that maybe this code might be released out into the wild, and then that'll cause you an issue. So I know Google and AWS, they incorporate their secrets manager into the serverless function. So you can have those credentials in that function, but you have them in a secure place where they can be audited. You can monitor who accesses them and when. And then even more so, you can automate the rotation of them because I'm sure you've probably experienced it. Sometimes trying to rotate credentials can be an absolute undertaking. So being able to have that secrets manager, being able to have that automation in place, that's just more man hours that you're saving.
I love that. I love that. So one of the things I picked out from your LinkedIn profile, and I'd love to have you give us a little more color on it, is that you created an NSG alerting system, right? That utilized cloud functions, specifically around GCP, the Cloud Security Command Center, back to ServiceNow, right? So I know there's a lot of organizations that use ServiceNow as their IT service management backend. So tell us a little bit more about what exactly you built, and then maybe think of it in terms of what were things like before you did this, and then how the SOC team benefited from it afterwards. So give us kind of the big picture and take us from there.
Yeah, this was one of my first really big projects, and it's something I'm really proud of. Before, our SOC was actually monitoring manually our kind of our security SIM to see kind of what alerts were coming in, and then creating tickets based off that. It was a really laborious process, um, and I felt like it wasted too much time of our SOC instead of actually solving security issues. So um, Google has now since built a lot of products that kind of automate this even more. But before, it was you had to install an App Engine instance, which we did, and we were able to have that App Engine instance go to a cloud function. So when like a configuration alert happened, it would automatically go into our cloud function, and our cloud function would build out the ticket with a ServiceNow
Hmm.
connection for us. So no longer was anyone even looking at our security SIM. It was all being done automatically, and the tickets where we wanted to act on were automatically being put in. And the only thing our SOC was doing was their job was just triaging and investigating those tickets. So it saved a bunch of man hours. And because it was one of my first big projects in the cloud, it made me know a lot about these serverless cloud functions and a lot of the products that the cloud has to offer. Things like PubSub, the amount of data that PubSub can pipe through is great, and the automation of just at the second where the configuration issue happens, I think we can get a ticket in less than 10 seconds into ServiceNow once that happens. And that is just, I always like to tout that. It's always something I've been very proud of doing. The speed in
Sure.
which serverless is allowed to give you this agility. Because if you try to put this automation function on, let's say, like a compute engine instance or a VM, you're running that maybe 3 or 4 times a day. It's never going to be continuous like it is when you're able to just have an automated pipeline that can, like I said, get you an alert in 10 seconds.
I love that. So that must have been something that you're not only, which should you be proud of that, but also I think the SOC team would probably find this amazingly powerful. So congratulations on that. That is, I love to hear when, people are building based upon serverless functions, things like this, right? That actually improve the rate at which the organization can respond when there's threats. So
I always think the best security is the ones where you're able to not slow down the process, but make it faster and better. Because it's tough to implement security tools if you have to go up to them and be like, listen, this is going to slow down how you do things. No one wants to implement something like that. And it makes people adverse to security. If you come with the perspective of, I'm going to make you faster and more secure, not only is everyone going to buy that, but also they will become more security mindset in the future.
So I think this is a good segue into kind of just the overall topic of metrics, right? So obviously your SOC team is probably getting some pretty good metrics now out of the system because of this and other improvements. But what I've found is that metrics are vital to success of almost anything in life, right? So Mark, question for you would be, what are 3 metrics that you would recommend starting with when it comes to automation and security, and why, right? I know there's probably 3,000, but if you had to pick only 3, what would those be and why?
So I would say the first one is try to identify the problem that you're actually trying to solve and then come up with a key performance indicator to measure success in that problem. So let's say I think my past example is, let's say you're trying to improve an employee onboarding system. You may want to improve, okay, how many days does it take for our employee to be fully onboarded? And then that's your KPI right there. That's what we're trying to improve. And then use serverless or automation as a possible solution to that. You want to make sure that what you do implement is going to make sure that it actually does improve that KPI. And I feel like a lot of people, like I said earlier, they'll automate for the sake of automation, or they'll do a project for the sake of doing some kind of activity and not realize that activity doesn't always equal accomplishment. So always have that just one KPI metric that you're trying to solve and see how serverless can do that. And then the next big metric you want to figure out is cost, because sometimes serverless isn't always the cheapest option. Cold starts for Lambda and compute engine, if you're doing a process that's just 24/7 and it's constantly spinning up new cloud function instances, it can get expensive. So you have to make sure that, okay, we do have a process that we do want to automate. Is serverless the best way to do it? And I think for the third metric, it's like I said, you want to see how much time and cost it actually does save you, at least in man hours. So, if you build this serverless application, but it's taking you a ton of time to manage it, or you're having to constantly update these third-party packages or APIs, then it's not really saving you time. And at the end of the day, we want to save time, we want to save money, and we want to improve the KPIs for a problem we have.
So, and you tell me if I have this right, but from what I can tell, it seems like your skill set really seems to be a blend of security and DevOps, which is, I think, rare. What should security teams be doing differently when working with DevOps teams, right? Obviously, there's kind of the age-old security versus development, but what have you seen or what would you recommend doing differently when working with DevOps? What would you recommend security teams do differently?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of security teams, they tackle DevOps or the developer experience as a threat, when I think it should be tackled as an opportunity. I kind of went into the DevOps space more as a need than it was a want. When I was in college, the last thing I ever wanted to do was do coding, because I felt like it just wasn't my thing. And after moving into the Google Cloud space, and a lot of people who work in Google can attest to this, Google is such a developer-focused platform. Sure. The API libraries are huge. Whenever I train people on it, I tell you, listen, if you can code, then the world is your oyster when it comes to both Google, AWS, Azure. All of them have huge API libraries. So coming into that NSG project, it forced me to learn to code. And ended up where I learning loving it. But kind of that trial of going through coding this project made me understand the developer experience more. And it made me understand that, view development as an opportunity. Like go to the developers, see what they're doing and see where can we implement easy security based projects into their own processes instead of just, let's say there's some shadow IT in the DevOps pipeline. Instead of just going outright banning it, because what that's going to do is just going to make the animosity between the developer and the security team greater. What you should do is I think everyone should at least have the empathy for each other's team and be able to see it from their perspective and say, hey, we want you to be more secure, but we also want to make your jobs easier as well. And if you have that kind of mindset of you want to help them out, you want to not hamper them, but make them advance themselves even more, it's very easy to make good and meaningful connections with that.
So when you think about the last 3 years of your career at Manhattan Associates, what would you say you're most proud of? What's your kind of maybe your big accomplishment? I know we talked about your NSG project, but maybe what are some other things that you're most proud of in your 3 years at Manhattan Associates?
Yeah, I would say kind of going back to our last question, I think we've been able to make great connections with our developer team. I feel like since being here, everyone has been so security minded from the top to the bottom. It makes us an immensely secure organization, and that's something you'd always love to see, especially on a security team. But I think another great accomplishment I've been is just where I am right now. I came fresh out of college as a system administrator, and I was kind of in that point where I didn't really know exactly what point of IT or security I wanted to be in. And I'm being told, you need to pick a specialization, you need to do this. And I was kind of, well, I wanted to do a little bit of everything. Sure. And so when I took the opportunity to learn Google, I felt like I did have that opportunity to learn a little bit of everything. I can do the developer mindset, I can do the architecture mindset and the security mindset. And I think that's kind of difficult for people like me getting into the industry, not really knowing where they want to be at, especially when it comes to security, because at least in my college, we didn't even have a security program. I went to Georgia Southern and we started one right when I left. So I think for new people coming in, I think it's, especially for me, trying to get into this industry is so hard. So the fact that I am here where I am now, I always consider it just a great blessing. And I can attribute that to how great Manhattan's been to just me and all my other coworkers and the culture around us. I would say another great accomplishment that we've really done here is just how much we've been cloud focused as a company and how much input that everyone from top down is willing to have when it comes to, we want to move further into the cloud. How can we make that as secure as possible? And I feel like that's rare for a lot of companies to have such a secure mindset, and to be able to be a part of such a huge movement, especially where I am now, I think is a great accomplishment, and we're doing great things here.
So Mark, how do you personally continue to learn and stay on top of things in your role? Because, you're 3 years in, you're doing some really cool things, but as you can probably imagine, right, you can get into a rut, right? So, but but you sound like you're not that kind of guy. How do you continue to learn and really stay on top of things?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit too impatient with myself to be put in a rut. I always like to try new things, but I think cloud security is one of those industries where you have two different technologies that are moving very fast. You have to keep up with the security aspect of it, which sometimes can be extremely daunting. And then you have to keep up with the cloud aspect of it. And, Azure, AWS, and Google, they're releasing so many new features every day. It's hard to keep up with. So what I like to do is I like to try to make RSS feeds that kind of pipe into one place, both, what's going on in the security industry, what's going on in the cloud industry, how can we prevent these risks that are arriving to a lot of other companies, and how can we utilize the new products that cloud has. And I do a lot of that using, like I said, RSS feeds. I used Cloud Guru a lot when I was getting certified, and a Cloud Guru has I started when it was young, but man, it's exploded now. I think is a great resource to have. And then Cybrary and Code Academy are also really great resources. A lot of people ask me, because I didn't really have a coding background, how I got into coding and how I started loving it. And I think the best way to get started, at least into the developer experience, is not to hit the books or learn it the traditional way. I think the best way, at least for me, was think of a project and then learn as you do the project. So a great example is I'm trying to learn Swift right now for iOS development. And instead of just hitting the books or using traditional resources, I'm just trying to make the app. And as I go along, I just Google, how do I make a class, or how do I make a button in Swift? And as you go along through the project, you'll start learning more and more. You'll start reading Stack Overflow, and you'll start understanding it a lot better. And for people who do want to start coding, I would say Python's also a great language to start. It's human readable. The resources are immense. I've been trying to learn a different language, but it's been difficult because Python is just so easy and it's so powerful. So
that has long been on my bucket list, and I have not gotten to it yet. I probably have 3 Python development books, and one of these days I am going to.
I have a few Python development books too, but like I said, I feel like the best, at least for me, and this might be the same for you, Matt, is just think of a project like maybe you want to start a serverless web app using Flask, and just as you go through the project, go on Stack Overflow, see how other people did it. And Python's so human readable that you'll be able to understand it pretty quickly.
I love that. So tell us, right? So I know we have this cybersecurity talent shortage. Are you hiring at Manhattan Associates? And if so, where can listeners go to learn more? Obviously, you're excited to be at Manhattan Associates, so you're probably one of the best promoters for it. But are you guys hiring security roles?
Yeah. I'm not sure about security roles, but we're hiring for a lot of cloud-based roles and a lot of cloud architect roles. We're hiring so much, honestly, it's hard for me off the top of my head to think of what we are. But definitely go to our website. It's manage.com, and you'll be able to apply there. But we'll love to have you. The hiring rush is real, and like I said, we've been top company in Atlanta for 9 years straight. And I think that speaks to itself. So
I love it. So what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, Mark, if they want to learn a little bit more about maybe some of the projects that you're working on and just want to stay in touch with you? What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think connect with me on LinkedIn. Just message me and say that you listen to the podcast, and we can connect from there. I like to post on LinkedIn a lot, all my interesting findings and what I've been doing day to day. Recently, I read a good book called Ride of a Lifetime. It's by the CEO of Robert Igar, and I've been posting about that on my LinkedIn. So
I love it. Leaders are learners. So I love to hear that you're learning, you're reading, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today, talking a little bit about Manhattan, talking about your passion for serverless and coding, and I will be interested to follow your career as you kind of make your way. So thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks, Matt. It's been great being here.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.